Something shifted in California this week that most people haven't fully processed yet. A Coca-Cola bottling facility, one that's been operating in the state for decades, has gone dark. The shutdown itself isn't just a corporate restructuring footnote, it's become a flashpoint. Governor Newsom has publicly called out the company, and the reaction from both sides tells you this goes deeper than one factory closing its doors. What makes this different is the timing and the context. California is already navigating a complex relationship between business regulation, labor costs, and corporate presence. When a brand as iconic and deeply embedded in American commerce as Coca-Cola pulls operations from the state, it raises questions that extend far beyond soda production. Jobs are gone. A community is affected. And now there's a very public confrontation between state leadership and one of the world's largest beverage companies. This isn't about taking sides. It's about understanding what's actually happening beneath the headlines, why this closure happened now, what it signals about California's economic environment, and what it might mean for other companies weighing similar decisions. The Coca-Cola facility that closed was located in Ontario, California, not far from the logistics heart of Southern California. It employed hundreds of workers directly, and when you factor in the suppliers, the transportation networks, and the ancillary services that depended on that operation, the economic footprint was significant. This wasn't a small satellite office, it was a production hub, and when Governor Newsom addressed the closure publicly, he didn't mince words. He framed it as a choice, not an inevitability, and he pointed to what he sees as corporate decisions that prioritize profit margins over community investment. Now, Coca-Cola's response has been more measured, as you'd expect from a company of that size. They've cited operational efficiency, changing market dynamics, and the need to consolidate production in facilities that can serve multiple regions more cost-effectively. On paper, that sounds reasonable. Corporations make these kinds of decisions all the time. But the governor's anger isn't coming from nowhere. It's rooted in a broader tension that's been building in California for years now, and this closure is just the latest data point in a pattern that's becoming harder to ignore. California has the fifth largest economy in the world. It's home to some of the most innovative companies on the planet. It's a state that has historically attracted business investment because of its market size, its infrastructure, its talent pool, and its cultural influence. But over the past decade, something has shifted. Major corporations have been quietly, and sometimes not so quietly, reassessing their presence in the state. Tesla moved its headquarters to Texas. Oracle did the same. Hewlett-Packard Enterprise relocated. CBRE Group, one of the largest commercial real estate services firms in the world, moved to Dallas. And it's not just tech companies. It's manufacturing, finance, and now consumer goods. The reasons given are usually similar: high taxes, regulatory complexity, cost of living that makes it difficult to attract and retain talent, energy costs, permitting delays, labor laws that companies argue are overly restrictive. These aren't new complaints, but the frequency and scale of corporate exits have accelerated in recent years. And when a company like Coca-Cola, which has deep roots in American consumer culture and operates in all 50 states, decides that maintaining a bottling operation in California no longer makes financial sense, it sends a message that resonates beyond just that one decision. What's important to understand here is that this isn't just about one political philosophy versus another. It's not about left versus right in the traditional sense. It's about the real-world consequences of policy choices, market forces, and corporate strategy all intersecting in ways that affect ordinary people who just want stable jobs and predictable futures. The workers at that Ontario facility didn't wake up one day and decide to become part of a political debate. They were doing their jobs, supporting their families, and contributing to their community. Now they're facing uncertainty, and the explanations they're getting from both the company and the state government probably feel abstract compared to the very concrete reality of a lost paycheck. Governor Newsom's outrage is understandable from a political and humanitarian standpoint. He's the leader of a state that prides itself on worker protections, environmental standards, and a progressive vision of what an economy should look like. When a major employer leaves, it's a failure of that vision in some sense, or at least it can be perceived that way. And politically, it's untenable to stay silent when hundreds of jobs disappear and a multinational corporation is the one making the call. So he's pushed back publicly, criticized the company's decision, and framed it as a choice that didn't have to happen this way. But here's where it gets complicated. Coca-Cola isn't a villain in this story, at least not in any simple way. They're a publicly traded company with shareholders, and those shareholders expect returns. If operating costs in California are significantly higher than in other states, and if regulatory compliance requires additional layers of administrative overhead, and if energy costs are climbing, and if the logistics of distributing product from that specific location no longer makes sense in their national network, then the decision to close that facility starts to look less like corporate greed and more like basic business logic. That doesn't make it less painful for the workers affected, but it does complicate the narrative. What we're really seeing here is a tension that runs through the entire American economy right now. States compete with each other for business investment. They offer tax incentives, streamlined permitting, lower operating costs, and other inducements to attract companies. It's a race that some states are willing to engage in aggressively, and others view with skepticism or outright hostility, because they believe it undermines worker protections and environmental standards. California has generally positioned itself in the latter camp. The state has higher minimum wages than the federal standard. It has strict environmental regulations. It has robust worker protections, including paid family leave, strong overtime rules, and protections against certain forms of contract labor classification. These are policies that many Californians support and believe are morally and economically justified. But there's a cost to those policies, and that cost isn't evenly distributed. For large, profitable tech companies with high-margin products, California's regulatory environment is manageable. For manufacturing operations with thin profit margins and high labor and energy costs, it's a different calculation. And when companies start moving operations out of state, the tax base shrinks, the job market weakens, and the very programs and protections that the state has built start to become harder to fund. It's a feedback loop that's difficult to break once it starts. The Coca-Cola closure also highlights another issue that doesn't get talked about enough, which is the role of automation and changing consumer behavior. Soda consumption in the United States has been declining for years. People are drinking more water, more energy drinks, more coffee, and less sugary carbonated beverages. That means companies like Coca-Cola are dealing with a shrinking market for their core product, at least in traditional forms. When demand is flat or declining, companies look for ways to cut costs and improve efficiency. That often means consolidating production, investing in automation, and reducing headcount. So even if California had the most business-friendly environment imaginable, there's a chance this facility would have faced pressure eventually just because of broader market trends. But the fact that California was chosen for closure rather than a facility in another state suggests that there were specific factors that made this location more vulnerable. And that's what has the governor concerned. If California becomes the first place companies look when they need to cut costs, then the state's long-term economic competitiveness is at risk. It's not just about one factory. It's about the signal it sends to other companies that are making similar calculations right now. There's also a human element here that's easy to overlook in the policy debates. The workers at this facility weren't abstract economic units. They were people with mortgages, car payments, kids in school, and retirement plans that depended on steady employment. When a plant closes, it doesn't just affect the workers. It affects the local restaurants that depended on lunch business. It affects the gas stations where people filled up on their way to and from work. It affects the tax revenue that funded local schools and services. It affects the housing market because suddenly there are fewer people with stable incomes who can afford to buy homes in the area. The ripple effects of a closure like this can take years to fully play out, and by the time they do, the political attention has usually moved on to something else. Governor Newsom understands this, which is why he's been so vocal. He knows that if he's seen as indifferent to job losses, it undermines his political standing and his broader argument that California's model works. But he's also in a difficult position because the tools he has to respond are limited. He can't force Coca-Cola to keep the plant open. He can criticize the company publicly, which he's done. He can offer state assistance to the displaced workers, which the state will likely do through retraining programs and unemployment benefits. He can try to attract other employers to the area to fill the economic gap. But he can't change the fundamental calculus that led Coca-Cola to make this decision unless he's willing to rethink some of the policies that the company presumably factored into its analysis. And that's where this becomes a broader national conversation. Other states are watching what happens in California very closely. Texas, Florida, Tennessee, and other states with more business-friendly regulatory environments have been actively courting companies to relocate. They've been running ads, offering tax breaks, and highlighting their lower costs of operation. And it's working. People and businesses are moving. Not everyone, and not uniformly, but enough to be noticeable. The question is whether this represents a sustainable model or whether those states are simply winning a short-term race to the bottom that will eventually leave everyone worse off. There's an argument that says California's approach, despite its costs, produces better long-term outcomes. Higher wages mean more consumer spending. Environmental protections mean cleaner air and water, and lower healthcare costs down the road. Worker protections mean less exploitation and more stability for families. These are real benefits, and they shouldn't be dismissed. But there's also an argument that says, if the costs become so high that companies simply leave, then those benefits become irrelevant because there are no jobs to protect in the first place. It's a tension that doesn't have an easy answer, and reasonable people can disagree about where the right balance is. What's clear is that the Coca-Cola closure is a symptom of a larger challenge. California is trying to maintain its economic dominance while also pursuing an ambitious policy agenda that prioritizes social and environmental goals. That's a difficult balancing act, and it's not obvious that it's working as intended. The state still has enormous strengths. It has world-class universities, a massive consumer market, incredible natural resources, and a culture of innovation that's hard to replicate. But it also has weaknesses that are becoming more pronounced over time, and those weaknesses are starting to affect the decisions that businesses make about where to invest and where to operate. For the workers at the Ontario facility, all of this context probably feels distant and abstract. What they know is that their jobs are gone, and the explanations they're getting don't change that fact. Some will find new work relatively quickly, some won't. Some will leave California entirely, joining the stream of people who have concluded that the state's cost of living and economic uncertainty outweigh its advantages. And that's a loss not just for California, but for the country as a whole, because when one state struggles, it affects everyone. We're not 50 separate economies. We're one interconnected system. And when a major part of that system starts showing signs of stress, it's worth paying attention. The controversy around this closure isn't going to be resolved anytime soon. Governor Newsom will continue to push for policies that he believes protect workers and the environment. Coca-Cola and other companies will continue to make decisions based on their financial interests. Workers will continue to navigate an economy that often feels indifferent to their needs. And the rest of us will watch as this plays out, trying to understand what it all means for the future of work, the future of manufacturing, and the future of states like California that are trying to chart a different course than their neighbors. What happened in Ontario isn't just a local story. It's a preview of debates and decisions that are coming to communities across the country, and how we respond to those challenges will shape the economic landscape for years to come.